Welcome to Hot Takes, the Hotwire podcast. Hotwire is a global tech communications consultancy, and I am Azizza Brinson, Senior Media Strategy Manager here at Hotwire, and your host for this episode. This is the second in a series of episodes focused on media relation topics, featuring reporters from within the industry, offering key advice and valuable takeaways on a variety of topics. Today, you are listening to PR Nightmares, Views from a Journalist, and I'm talking to Sasha Lekach, news writer at Mashable. Thanks for joining us, Sasha. Can you take the time to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sasha Lekach. I'm based out of San Francisco, Mashable's transportation writer. Sit on the tech team and cover all things electric vehicles, autonomous, ride sharing, you name it. I cover it.
All right. So let's just jump right into it. We've all seen the horror stories from journalists on Twitter about all the trash interactions they have with PR professionals. So as a PR pro myself, I can say we all make mistakes and some days we're just not on our A game. But that said, there are some pretty horrific stories from journalists and I would like to get to the bottom of it so my fellow colleagues can know what not to do when it's time to flex those pitching skills, and so that they can also be horrified at maybe some of the ideas that they might have in their heads that might line up with some of the things that you've seen. So for my first question, you could just tell me about your general pet peeves from PR representatives that you hate to see in your inbox.
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to start off. I love a lot of my relationships with PR professionals and I get a lot of great pitches and I'm kept informed by a lot of the PR folks out there. So it's not all nightmares. It's not all totally horrifying, but there are some big faux pas and issues that come up. I'd say one of the worst is just very typical, like just the wrong name, the wrong publication. It's just those little things get kind of annoying over time. For me, more specifically, I get really frustrated with very general pitches or just totally off base pitches that don't, obviously this person has not looked at what I cover. I feel like South by Southwest just happened and it was a great example of people just shooting out pitches to anyone and everyone. And I cover tech and transportation specifically. And yeah, that's a wide range of topics, but I'm not going to be covering your makeup tutorial app. I'm not going to. I'm not the right person. So a lot of those, the ones that are just totally no connection to what I cover and never have covered, those ones kind of get me.
Yeah. So let's talk about names. As a person with a name that can be a little hard to pronounce, so I'm sure you get that with your last name too, right?
Yes.
Mine is definitely confusing for so many people to spell. So I always wonder if anybody else goes through as many situations where people butcher your name. Whether it's in an email, mine is where it's Azizza Brinson and it tells you the email, but you still get it wrong. How many times has that happened to you? Is it just people just not getting your name correct altogether, and instead of it's Sasha, they're calling you Alice or something, or is it how does that happen for you?
Right. Well, there's just you're getting the wrong email to the wrong person snafu, which is just kind of embarrassing for everybody. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'd say, names wise, I get it. You're just trying to contact people, but I don't know. A lot of times people call me Sarah and I'm not. Just look a little closer. I'm not there. And it also gives me a clue that they don't actually follow or have really read what I write. Because I'm very active on Twitter, as a lot of journalists are. And, a perfunctory Twitter search, you would see very quickly who I am, what I cover, what I'm retweeting, and just basics about me. So that's usually a clue that they really have no idea who they're emailing. But again, I usually don't get too caught up in that part. I get a lot of emails, so I'm very quick to just look at the meat of an email. So honestly, if you're saying how are your introduction, I kind of barely glance at it. So you can try really hard, but sometimes I'm just not reading your introduction.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like when I first started doing PR, you rely on decision tools of Muck Rack a lot. And then what I found out very early on, right, was when you use Cision, especially Muck Rack is way better, but Cision, however, it would say say you wrote about I don't know, say you wrote about a book one time in like 1994, they would have books under your like beat. And so you're thinking like, oh, I'm pitching this reporter because they write about books. That's what Cision told me. Exactly. I'm an intern, I'm learning. And they're like, yeah, use Cision. It's going to be like your Bible. It's going to be your tool like to live by. Just for a reporter to come back and say like, you need to really do your research because like, I don't even write about books and this and that. And it's like, you can't limit yourself to like using Cision or whatever tool that your company has, because at the end of the day, you literally just need to look up reporters and find out like, this is what they're writing about. I get Cision said this, but like, here's what they've written about for the last 6 months. It's possible their beat may have changed or like whatever's messed up in the system. So you always find that. And then there's also like, right, where some people tend to do mail merges. And if you don't do your mail merge correctly, yep. The columns are all out of whack. Now you said, oh God, I would hope it's not a long list, but if you send a list of 50 people out, 50 people have the wrong name, the wrong message, and it could really impact it. So I completely understand like getting that email where it's like, this is clearly isn't me. You clearly meant this for a different person, but it is definitely embarrassing. And it's not something that you want to go back to your boss to say like, well, here's maybe why we didn't get coverage on this.
Right.
So
definitely.
Yeah. Do you think it's fair for like the hate that a lot of PR people receive from journalists?
No.
In certain cases?
No, I feel bad on behalf of all my journalist people who are so cruel. I'm like, come on, guys, cut them some slack. I am always impressed. I have some friends in the PR industry and people I've gotten to know over the years that I, have a working relationship with. I'm like, how do you keep on top of your emails? How do you respond quickly? How do you keep track of like all these details? Like, very impressive people in this industry. And I'm always in awe. And when there are mistakes and there are, errors or misfires, I, for one, I don't get too annoyed. I'm a big proponent of, maybe this is kind of cruel, but it's just like, if I don't have time to deal with it, I just don't respond. It just kind of sits in my inbox. I was just going to say, I'm looking at my inbox right now and I have 25,131 unread emails. But like most of those are just, Business Wire and the, like you're saying, Cision and a lot of other, just like alerts and mass email lists. But, stuff is going to get lost in there and there's going to be things that aren't addressed to me. And if I was a really nice person and had more time and patience, I would go through and be like, you should talk to my colleague or you should talk to this publication. I'm not going to do that. I can't. I would just spend all day sitting in my inbox, which sometimes I've done. I've done days where I'm like, this is an inbox day, but it's not, it's just not feasible. But I'm always impressed with PR people's abilities to corral a good, like an inbox. And especially when it comes to, once you do engage and we're working on a story together and just keeping up and that you're not the only reporter, like there's the other people covering the story as well. So being able to keep, I think it's a skill for sure. So I cut them plenty of slack. So I'm not here as one of the main haters, but I have sent emails being like, I don't cover this. And probably was very curt and short. I also am not huge on pleasantries. I don't know. I feel like a couple of years ago, I read a blog post or something about just like, get to what you want to say and just say it. So I've kind of taken that to heart. And maybe it seems really efficient, but I kind of like it because I don't know. No one's really telling me how their day is. So I'm like, why am I even asking?
I'm glad you said like you admire like the way that we're able to handle it. And because the way I see it, I admire journalists, right? And I say that because like what's the stat, right? For every one journalist, there's 6 PR people, right? And so it's like, imagine, I know if it were me and like every time like I had to like do something and there were like 6 PR people every like hour like coming at me with like so many different like pitches and wanting so many things and then following up the next day to be like, get over it already, right? So like having the like the candor to like deal with that and like be very understanding is admirable on your behalf, because I can definitely like empathize with journalists who are like, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, this is insane. So thank you.
Yeah. I also come from a very general news background, and I actually started at Mashable covering general news, breaking news type of coverage. So I kind of understand why it's been many years, but I have a little bit more compassion maybe for why I'm getting, why I get an email. I'm on some listserv for, like I was saying before, beauty products, or I don't know, something else, gender issues or education type things. Like I have covered throughout my career a lot of different topics. So that I kind of understand where it comes from. And I'm a person who loves, that's why I'm a journalist. I love like disseminating information, getting the information to the right people. So I'm always happy to be like, oh, this is not for me. I don't cover TVs. Like, I'm not going to cover your new TV, but like my colleague does all the TV coverage, like talk to him.
Yeah.
So I'm usually, if it's like a big brand, especially, like Samsung or I don't know, and like Dyson, I know like we love vacuum coverage, like stuff like that, not to get weirdly specific, but like people love vacuums. And it's like, I don't really cover vacuums, but I'll happily pass along like a good story if I see one, So
which type of PR professional do you prefer to connect with? I've heard the conversations where like some people are like, I prefer like the PR rep that's in-house for like a particular brand versus like agency. So like I know there's a preference, but like I don't know whether you have a preference, but who would you prefer to work with and why? Is it just easier? Like how does it work for you?
I guess that's really been a blend. I think for if I am working with an agency rep, the ones that have really committed to the brands that they are repping, they become almost in-house is what I've discovered. Like there's certain people I remember at like Cruise, and I can name some other like autonomous vehicle companies and some of the like the rideshare companies and stuff. Like they use some outside agencies. And honestly, at some point I was like, wait, I don't remember who's in-house and who's from the third party group. Because they've done such a good job of really getting to know the company and doing a great job of connecting you. So sometimes I kind of prefer the outside agency because they're also very willing to like, oh, I don't know, like I'm gonna look into that for you, and like they'll find the right people. While sometimes in-house, maybe they're like, I am the right person, and I don't know, like I don't know. I've had great experiences across the board. But yeah, I guess maybe sometimes I get confused. I'm like, who should I contact? Like, it's like a big company like Uber or Lyft or something comes to mind where I'm like,
it's so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, okay. And sometimes I'm like, do I have the like organization breakdown correct? Because I'm like, I know he does product and he does like marketing and she does business stuff. So
sometimes you get like you and like 3 other colleagues and like, who wants to jump in on this? It's fine. Anybody, just like as long as you know what people to get in contact with. So what makes the most mistakes? Agency reps or in-house reps in terms of pitching?
I guess probably agency, just because of the nature of their work, because they're covering so many different clients and different sectors. Like when you're in-house, you cover that company. Yeah. And you're in that field. Like if you're in autonomous vehicles, like you're in autonomous vehicles, while if they're like an outside agency, they're working on the Waymo account, and then they're also working on, I don't know if Waymo has outside agency, but Waymo, and then they're also working on, I don't know, some like kitchen appliances or who knows, like, or doing some weird NFT project, who knows? So
it's one of those things where I've said before in the past where like being in agency, like PR, like you kind of have to have like split personalities. Like one minute, like I'm an expert on like social media. Then the next minute I'm an expert in like advertising. Then I'm an expert at AI over here. And it's like, depending on how many accounts you have, you're splitting yourself in so many different ways. And then when you go back to your friends and you're having all this conversation, it's like, a lot of random stuff. It's like, I work on a lot of different topics.
Yeah. And sometimes not to be vicious or anything, but then sometimes you're like, okay, this person doesn't know anything beyond what they were briefed on, right? Like you're like, oh, you don't have the expertise beyond like this project or campaign. Like sometimes that comes out. So I think that's where sometimes mistakes happen. I remember I'm not naming names or anything, but it was like an e-bike was like a 3D printed e-bike and we got to see it. And it was really cool, but the PR rep just didn't know anything about like how it was made, what it was like, anything about it other than like the basic facts that were basically on the press release. And it was fine, but you know, it was just like another step. And it would have been nice to be like, do you not like, just you give me the answers instead of having to like figure all this stuff out. But yeah, stuff like that sometimes happens. And I understand that. She was like, I don't know. This is one of many accounts. And I was like, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me about the worst or one of the worst times a PR rep wouldn't just like take no for an answer, because I've always heard like journalists say like PR people just don't know how to like just take no. Like you can't just like take that and just like go back to your client with it. So like tell me about one of those times.
I have a lot of those. Honestly, I start ignoring them, which is bad. I think not. They actually are very similar. Just like very persistent emailing is usually the problem. But what I find the most egregious is when it switches to phone calls and then like text, and you're like, okay, this is too much. Like, are you going to cover it? Are you going to cover it? That type of behavior. I'm like, okay, now I just don't really want to cover it because you're being so pushy. But another part that I don't really like is when somebody really wants you to cover something, and I get that you're following up and I haven't responded and I'm sleeping on your great pitch. But then you write me like a separate email with like, you should read this, Sasha, as the headline. And I'm like, or something, like something like that, or like trying to reach you, Sasha. And it's separate from the original emails. So then I have no idea what the original pitch even was. I'm like, what are we talking about again? Like, did I say yes to something? So kind of keeping everything streamlined. Most PR people are very good about like making sure it's not like 18 different email chains, but there definitely are the people who start a new email for every time they reach out. And I'm like, no, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Like, no. So that type of stuff, I'd say, is pretty much the worst. I do not love getting phone calls, unless we like set up a time to be like, let's talk about this on the phone. But like a cold call pitch, phone calls also just to be like, did you see my email? I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna say no the way I would have said no over email. Like I didn't know. I didn't. Yeah, I get they're being pressured. Like you were saying, like there's like the client or agency, somebody's like we need to get some traction on this, obviously. But I don't know.
Now I'm glad you said that though, because I literally had a question on the docket about about whether or not you like to receive calls. Like I've seen it happen where people are like, you could always just call them, and we're like, it is a tech focused world. It is 2022. I know that probably worked in like old school PR days, but like reporters are like, don't call me.
Yeah.
And so
it's fine to call. Yeah. Once you have like a relationship or you're working on something together. Yeah. I love the phone. It's great. Or if you're like, hey, like, can I call you? And if I tell you, yeah, then yes, go ahead and call me. But yeah. Like you said, like it should not be your first line of offense.
Right. It can be very daunting. I've worked with a lot of like junior team members in it, and pitching in general, especially if they don't already have a relationship or haven't seen it done, is very intimidating. Right. So for you to like tell and instruct them to just be like, yeah, call them. Imagine how frightening that'd be. I could like imagine like the person like shaking out, like what like the words they're gonna say. Like it's very fearful. Like you're telling me to literally call a stranger that I never met, that I don't know. They don't know my number, so they may not even be expecting the call. I'm supposed to call them, and am I supposed to walk them through a pitch that I probably already emailed and they already probably have seen and just don't want to respond? Like,
right, that's the awkward part.
Yeah, it's very awkward. So I'm glad I didn't have to get to that question. You already answered that for me.
Yeah. Though there are moments where a phone call, like especially for big news, this works better if you have a relationship, not from like an initial pitch, but if you have a relationship with someone and there's like big news coming from the company you're representing or you work at, it can be really helpful for them to be like, hey, heads up, like we have this big embargo going to be lifting tomorrow. Like, do you want me to tell you about it? You're like, yes, thank you. Stuff like that I really appreciate. But that's a little bit further down the line. If you already kind of have a rapport and they know what's up and they like know that you are most likely going to cover this big news.
Yeah.
So that type of situation is always helpful.
So how many times do people generally pitch you for topics that you would never cover? Like, and like, what are those examples?
That's a good question. Well, so since registration opened for South by Southwest, my inbox was a mess. So I'd say like mid-February, I think it was. And South by Southwest just ended this past weekend. So it was like a solid almost month of just bad emails. I mean, there was like a discussion about like GMOs and women in leadership. I mean, like, it's great. Women in leadership, great. But it's like, I'm not going to be covering that. Like a lot of like business profiles type of things. And it's like, a lot of times, people pitch a lot about, like corporate news or funding rounds. And, you know, we have this new Series B and these are our new investors. And like, we're just not, especially at Mashable, like,
right.
We don't cover that news. We might have over 5 years ago when we had more of a business team. We haven't had a business team for many years, like just not covering that type of stuff. So I don't know, I get, I do a lot of deleting. It's kind of therapeutic. So throughout the day, I just like delete when I'm stressed. But I'm just like, I definitely already in the past, I don't know, we started this call 30 minutes ago. I don't know. I've already gotten, like 20 emails in the past 30 minutes, you know, and I'm sure some of them are great and some of them, and well, like, yeah, there's a whole range of things.
I think what happens generally is that like people see the press list, especially if their client is actually going to be attending some of these events. So they see the press list and they're like, oh, this person is attending. So just pitch them the news. And it's like, you still have to take into consideration the beat that they cover. Like just because they're attending a conference doesn't always mean that they're going to cover all the news that comes out of it. So that's something like you have to like explain to everybody. You would think that that's something that would already be like understood, but it's not. And so like, I get how that could be very frustrating because then you're like, why are you pitching Sasha? She doesn't cover this news. Well, she was on the press. Oh, like that's not.
Yeah, exactly. And especially this year was frustrating. Sorry, not to harp on South by Southwest, but it was very frustrating because our newsroom decided to attend virtually, and it was a mixed media hybrid event. So it was partially IRL and partially virtual, but it was very confusing. I guess I don't know what went out to like the media on the media list on the other side of the equation, because everyone was like, okay, we'll see you at this event, or like come meet this CEO. And I was like, I can only cover virtual events. So I spent a lot of time just dealing with logistics of, okay, is there a way I can set up a video call, or are you going to be streaming it? And they'd be like, oh no, we're going to be there. Like, aren't you? And it's like, no. So I really wish like South by Southwest had worked with their media communications team to make it clear, like what reporters were going to be there physically and which reporters were going to be covering virtually, because it's a very different way of covering an event. Yeah. So that was my main gripe this year, and obviously top of mind.
I feel like that just might be like the evolution of the newsroom these days because of the pandemic. Like that wasn't something that we would have had to think about before, and so now maybe that's something.
No, definitely.
Or you have to think about, like you might want to add a column for like, are you in person or are you going to be virtual? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I might have to provide that counsel to like my clients.
No, it would be great advice. And like you said, I think it's going to be a lot going forward. It's going to be a lot more like that. So something to consider.
Yeah. So have you ever had a time where you needed to get in contact with a PR rep right away and they were just unavailable? How did that make you feel? I understand. And the reason why I ask this is because I know how oftentimes like PR people are like really like begging to be like, can you get back to me? Can you get back to me? And then there's those moments where reporters do it in reverse and they're like, hey, like I have this story. Can this exec get back to you? And like, there are PR people who kind of like drag their feet about that. So like, how do you feel about that? Like, is there an example you can provide us?
Yeah, I was gonna say they're usually very good about responding themselves, but the actual content or the nugget of information you're trying to get, you can always tell when like someone's, like you said, stalling or dragging their feet on it. Usually the conversation starts, I can't think of a very specific situation, but this has happened often where you're like, okay, I'm looking for a comment, or can I talk to someone about something? And the people are like, what's your, like, can I get a sense of when you need this? Or like, do you have like specific questions you can tell me right now? You know, like you can already tell that they're like trying to vet this and like see if they can avoid having to like deal directly with getting the source or whoever it is on the line. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like PR people are very good at getting what you need. I don't know. Like I said, I'm always impressed. I'm like, how did you do that? But you know, sometimes you're like, I have a deadline and it's in 2 hours, and I know that's ridiculous. And they're like, yeah, like dude's in Israel, like you're not talking to him till tomorrow, you know, like it's just not gonna happen. Yeah. Like that has happened. So that sometimes can be like a different, just like workplace culture. Just because like a newsroom is very different. I don't know. I've only worked in newsrooms really, but a newsroom is really different from, I guess, the more common office environment or whatever an office looks like these days. But I don't know. So some stuff like that can sometimes get lost in translation, or they'll, yeah, I don't know if this is answering your question, but if you're trying to get something and they just kind of rehash what's like in the press release, and you're like, yeah, I got that from the press release. Like,
right, like give me something else.
I'm looking for something more. Yeah, something like that. Or you have something really specific and they're just like, they obviously like aren't able to answer it, or they can't, or whatever the reason. But
yeah,
and then kind of like step around it. I mean, that happens too. But sometimes I feel like as a journalist, I would just prefer to be like, we aren't disclosing, you know, being more definitive, like, okay, like no comment, or we can't talk about that at this time. Like, it sucks to get those responses, but it's actually way more helpful than like dancing around an answer and giving some like BS type statement or something. So I always appreciate when someone's like, okay, we're not talking about it, or, you know, that's not available yet, or whatever the real reason is. But
right, it's like it's better to close the loop on it so that like somebody's not just like dangling waiting for an answer. It's like just because like
exactly,
overachievers, and they're just like, I want to get you something. Like sometimes you just have to know when to like just, it's a no.
Right.
Have you had to blacklist or a particular company or email, or just block?
No. No, I have not. I mean, no, I haven't. I don't think I have. I have had weird people on LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn is its own beast. I don't really consider those like official pitches and PR people, because that and like Twitter DMs. I'm like, if you Twitter DM me and you have like a legit thing, I'll be like, great, send me an email. Like that's how you know I'm like a little bit interested and I'm willing to like hear more, but I want to see it in like my inbox and formatted that way, because I'm not going to piece together like a note on LinkedIn and some stuff over here in Twitter. Yeah, LinkedIn, I've definitely had like kind of weird or creepy type interactions, and I'll just block those people, or like they add me and I'm like, and then there's some people who, the very aggressive people, like friend you on Facebook, and I'm like, no, we're not friends. Right. I don't even know who you are. So that is, I've definitely blocked people on like deny friend requests. And if you're really obnoxious on LinkedIn, I'm gonna unconnect with you, or whatever the terminology is. But most people, the other thing is like, it's easy, and I think it's easy enough. I mean, you and your team obviously are very adept at this, but just finding my email address is not very difficult. Like it's on the Mashable website. I think I have it all over my Twitter, and on any of those journalism services, it's available. Like just do a little bit of digging and you can find it. So, but sometimes, you know, Twitter DM like works well because they saw that I tweeted about some autonomous scooter, and they're like, oh, I'm building an autonomous scooter charging station, and you're like, great. And then it works from there, but it's like, it has to be flow right. But if you're like cold pitching me, I don't know, I just got something about how to keep track of like your employees' work hours or something. I was like, I don't cover like,
transportation,
like workplace stuff. Yeah. But it's also just like, why are you DMing me this? Like, I'm not going to read this here. So stuff happens.
I like that Twitter is a new way, for the last few years, I guess it has been for us to like kind of reach out to reporters, because I think it removes people away from having these long pitches that really bother me. Like, I continuously tell people like, that pitch is too long. Nobody is reading past like the first couple of sentences. Like, break that down, girl. Like, you
definitely
have that. So like, I like that Twitter with Twitter, we're allowed to like just kind of just keep it short and sweet, gauge interest, and if you want to pass on it, then you can. And it's not as much noise as like our email and inbox and stuff like that. So that's wonderful. But I always find it super cringy when I hear that people are like, yeah, somebody tried to pitch me on Instagram. It's like, Instagram is a platform for visuals. Why are we sending like these?
Gets weird.
That like, it's like, let people like be like, have like some kind of social media that's for their personal life. Like, let them live, but like, weird. So let's talk jargon. Have you ever gotten a pitch that was like so overloaded with jargon that it was just like, you just had to X out of it? It was just too much or overwhelming?
The only thing I can think of is, no, I don't have a good example.
Sorry. You were one of the few journalists who haven't had to deal with some of the crazier things that other journalists have to deal with. So I feel like I'm a little bit more blessed than other journalists.
Yeah, I have gotten some. I've definitely had the experience of something. Usually it's around AI stuff. And it'll just be an email where I'm like, whoever wrote this obviously they themselves don't know what any of this means, if that makes sense. Like, I'm like, I don't understand.
From the release or from the blog. And
or like they are like put together some words that they thought sounded right. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And so it's not usually like, oh, I just don't know this stuff. It's like, the context of this, I don't understand what's happening. Or sometimes there's just like really basic miscommunication of like, oh, this isn't a real product, or like, oh, this is like an idea, or things like that have definitely happened to me where I'm like, wait, so can I see it? And they're like, what do you mean, can you see it? And I'm like, oh, I thought it was like an app or something. And they're like, no, like like a framework, or I don't know, stuff like that. Like, you're like, oh, okay.
Never
mind. But sometimes that gets lost in translation.
I always just tell my teams that if you can't talk to your friends in the same language, like, don't use it in the pitch. Advertising and marketing technology is usually like my specific niche as far as like companies that I've worked with, and so I know that there's a lot of acronyms across the board. So when I'm talking with like my teams, I know I can use it. But if I'm speaking of any of this work, like that's like actually like with somebody that I know, like a personal friend, then I'm like, let me like explain this, because I don't want you to be like, what is this? And what is that? It's like, if you have to do that, then you need to just scrap all of it out the pitch and like redo it and just make it like, don't make it simple where it doesn't sound interesting, but like just break it down. Like that the jargon can like go over people's heads. And I've had like reporters who are like, I've written about this topic for like at length for years, and I still do not prefer the jargon, right? Because like people make buzzwords and bring up words all the time, and over time it just gets way too convoluted. Like, it's like, get out of that space.
Right. And a lot of times, a good thing to keep in mind, I'm very happy that you tell people to simplify it and like break it down. And a lot of the times it's good to remember that I then am pitching my editor. So it's like this big chain of pitching. So it doesn't just stop at me. So like, even if I'm like, oh, this was a great pitch, I loved the jargon, I have to be able to explain it to my editor. So if you pitch me with a really clear, succinct, like, this is a new app, this is what it does, this is why it's great, blah, 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 something succinct and to the point, then I'm able to be like, we're a Slack newsroom, but like, however the newsrooms communicate, and just being like, hey, like this cool new app is coming out, this is what it does, and I can just slack that over real quick and be like, here's a screenshot of it, blah blah blah, good to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
well, I'm glad you said that, because that leads into like my final question. So we talked about all the bad ways PR pros have gone wrong, and so my final question would be, what's the most powerful pitch you received that you just knew you just had to take to your editors for approval?
Oh, I mean, I get a lot of good pitches. Just like the nature of what I do, especially when there's a new car reveal, it's always very popular. You know, like just kind of given events. I have relationships with certain companies where they know that I will be more focused on like a product release versus like a personnel, you know, like they know Sasha's not going to write about a promotion within the company, but she's going to write about like our new app and how you can now, I don't know, control your car through the app or whatever it might be. So those are always just kind of like, yeah, definitely, especially with established brands and relationships that I already have, that, you know, I always cover certain brands and we have that knowledge between each other. But I've definitely gotten pitches. I think what works really well, like you were saying, but like succinct, to the point, really clear on like what it is, what's happening, who's involved, if there's footage or video, you know, like if there's something to look at, I have a sense of what it is. Yeah, I don't know. This is not very general, but I'm thinking of one pitch. It was for this software company that it was super boring and jargony, but they had a really cool idea, which was to show how their software worked. They were going to do virtual like dog walking with the robot dog, Spot, the robot dog. And this was a company that I probably wouldn't cover normally, because they do like enterprise software and robotics management, you know, something that's not necessarily my game. Like I'm not that interested in that. But they were like, hey, to show you our software, you're going to like virtually walk a dog through the streets of San Francisco via like your computer. And I was like, yes, you did good work, because they knew I always write about the robot dog. So I was like, I'm intrigued by the robot dog. And then B, it was cool, this whole element of like virtually remote controlling something from far. Anyways, it worked out really well. I was able to do like a first person, tons of video, tons of photo content pieces, all from just like this pitch that wasn't necessarily 100%. You know, it wasn't with an established company and it wasn't directly in my beat, and it worked out really well. It was really fun and it did really well traffic wise, and it was a good experience overall, from like pitch to production or whatever the expression is. So yeah, that's, I think, would be an example of something that came together really well from a pitch that was clear and effective and worked.
I like how you said like the pitch was like super jargony and like kind of like low key, but then like you started going into it and I was like, wow, this sounds kind of interesting though. Like I kind of want to know about these like
right. And like they accepted also that my final story, I didn't go into detail on their software. I never was going to, but they kind of understood that that's okay, you know, and I mentioned them by name, obviously, as the people, you know, doing the, you know, offering the walk and doing the software to control the dog and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think you have to be willing to like probably let some things go. I don't know what their PR team was like on their side. They probably wished, we wish she had gone into how, you know, X, Y, and Z works, and she just glossed over it. But I don't know. It's a give and take, I think. How I see it.
For sure. I mean, I think that's like the beauty of like storytelling and PR, right? Like I know that like some clients are like obsessed with like, I want a full feature, but it's sometimes just the little things, right? Like understand the angle of the story that the reporter is trying to tell, and like figure out a way for you to like insert yourself into the conversation, but not like so overtly, right? It's that stuff that sometimes you read. I think who does really good with this, and it forced me to buy one was like Peloton, right? Where it's like you're just watching a show and their name just pops up, or like somebody like it's like inserted into an article somewhere. It's like, why is Peloton even relevant? And then over time, I remember thinking to myself, like, I want Peloton. I really want Peloton, and then I end up getting
it worked.
Like,
There we go.
Like that is like the best way to do it. So like even like I would hope that the PR people with that team fully understood it's like this is still a great op regardless. We're in here, we're mentioned, and we
exactly
don't need to go into, like the details of like what it is, because if you're anybody like me, if I see something interesting, I'm gonna Google it anyway and try to figure out like who these people are, what are they doing. So
right, just the exposure and things like that. But yeah, and I'm sure that I could think of other examples where an email turned into a great story, and it takes work on both ends, because it can sometimes be, your side crafting a really nice pitch, but it's also me being willing to see if there's a story potential within a pitch, because not everything's handed to you on a silver platter, right? Like as a journalist, like it'd be great if everyone was like, here's your exact story, but like that's not how it happens.
right.
So you have to be willing to put in a little bit of time and be a little creative and think, okay, what from this works, or what can we make work? Is it worth trying to find something? So
Right.
yeah, I think that happens a lot. So.
Well, thank you, Sasha, for joining us today. And thanks to you all for listening. If you would like to hear more from Sasha, you can follow her on Twitter at SashaJOL. Also, if you have more questions or would like more information about Hotwire, please visit us at hotwireglobal.com. We'll have new episodes soon, so please sign up on our website and we'll let you know when they are available.